සුපිරි එලියා වෙළඳපොලේ අඩුම මිලකට රුපියල් 160යි.
Tonight, humanitarian grounds. 93 prisoners, including 16 ex-LTT suspects held under the PTA and ex-MP and death row inmate Duminda Silva, receive presidential pardons. A sign of hope. Health authorities say that the decision on using the Pfizer vaccine as the second Covishield dose will be taken next week. Restrictions. Travel restrictions are set to be lifted at 4 a.m. tomorrow until further notice, as authorities call for the public to show more responsibility. Ignored calls. For the 29th consecutive year, the UN General Assembly calls on the US to lift its 59-year-old sanctions on Cuba as the country struggles with the pandemic. All this and much more coming up on this Thursday, the 24th of June 2021.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando in your top stories for tonight. In top news today, among 93 prisoners who received presidential pardons today were 16 former LTTE suspects who were detained under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Their release comes on the heels of Ilangai Tamilarsa Katchi parliamentarian M.A. Sumandiran's calls for the immediate release of political prisoners during yesterday's parliament sessions. The pardons were approved by the president in line with the Pusun Poya Day today. Also among those pardoned and released by the president today was former MP and death row inmate Duminda Silva. 93 prisoners were granted presidential pardons today, including 16 LTTE suspects held under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, as well as 77 minor offenders.
2021 පොසොන් පොහොය දිනේ නිමිත්තෙන් අතිගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමා විසින් බන්ධනාගාර රැඳවියන්ට විශේෂ සමාවක් දීලා තියෙනවා. එම සමාවට දිවයින පුරා තිබෙන බන්ධනාගාර 28කින් රැඳවියෝ 93 දෙනෙක් නිදහස් වෙනවා. මෙම රැඳවියන් අතර ත්‍රස්තවාදයේ වැළැක්වීමේ පනත යටතේ දඬුවම් ලබා සිටි රැඳවියන් 16 දෙනෙකු සිටිනවා. එම රැඳවියන් 15 දෙනෙක් අනුරාධපුර බන්ධනාගාරයෙන්ුත් එක්කෙනෙක් යාපනයේ බන්ධනාගාරයෙන්ුත් අද දින නිදහස ලබනවා. ඊට අමතරව සාමාන්‍ය වැරදි වලට බන්ධනාගාරගත වූ රැඳවියන් 77 දෙනෙකුත් අද දින බන්ධනාගාරයෙන් නිදහස් වෙනවා. මේ සියලු රැඳවියන් අපි PCR පරීක්ෂණයකට ලක් කරලා අපි මේ සෞඛ්‍ය ආරක්ෂිත ක්‍රමවේදය අනුව ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ නිවස තුල නිරෝධායනය සඳහා අද දින පිටත් කර යනවා.
Also among those pardoned was death row inmate Duminda Silva, who was convicted of murder and unlawful assembly. Several photographs alleged to have been taken at the time of his release from prison circulated on social media. In another development, inmates serving on death row at the Mahara prison have commenced a hunger strike today, demanding that their sentences be reduced to life imprisonment.
නව ග්‍රාමීය ණය යෝජනා ක්‍රමය යටතේ සුළු පරිමාණ ගොවියන්ටත් කුඩා කෘෂි ව්‍යාපාර සහයෝගිතා වැඩසටහන යටතේ ගොවි කණ්ඩායම් සඳහාත් අතහිත ලබා දෙනවා. වැඩි විස්තර සඳහා ළඟම බැංකුවක් වෙත යන්න.
Meanwhile, the presidential pardon for Duminda Silva was taken up by the Bar Association of Sri Lanka today. The BASL says that while acknowledging that the president has the power and discretion to pardon convicts, such discretion must be exercised judiciously, not arbitrarily and selectively. Further, US envoy Elena B. Teplitz has also commented on the issue whilst welcoming the release of former LTTE suspects. Whilst acknowledging that the president has the power and discretion to pardon convicts, the Bar Association of Sri Lanka stated that such discretion must be exercised judiciously. Issuing a statement on the pardon, BASL adds that such power must not be exercised arbitrarily and selectively. The BASL has therefore written to the President requesting that public be made aware of whether such a recommendation, advice or report was sought before granting a pardon to a murder convict. Meanwhile, US Ambassador to Sri Lanka Elena B. Teplitz took to social media today, welcoming the move to grant presidential pardon to political prisoners held under the PTA. However, the US envoy stated that releasing a convict whose conviction was upheld by the Supreme Court undermines the rule of law, while reminding the country of its commitment towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, of which accountability and equal access to justice are enshrined. Director General of Health Services Dr. Asela Gunawardena stated that the expert committee appointed to oversee vaccines will give a final verdict as on whether the Pfizer vaccine can be used as the second dose for those who have received the AstraZeneca vaccine next week. Meanwhile, despite COVID-19 related fatalities being reported in the excess of 40 on a daily basis, Sri Lanka's COVID-19 death rate is reportedly at 1.13%, well below the global rate of 2.17%.
So far, over 1.63 million Sri Lankans have received at least one dose of the vaccine since the national vaccination program commenced in January. However, due to the lack of AstraZeneca vaccine supplies globally, many countries are now considering the possibility of administering the Pfizer vaccine as its second dose. Similarly, Sri Lanka is also evaluating the possibility of mixing and matching the vaccines.
ඇස්ට්‍රාසෙනිකා එන්නත දෙවන මාත්‍රාව ලබා නොගත් අයට අපි කෙසේ හෝ ඇස්ට්‍රාසෙනිකා එන්නත ගෙනත් ලබා දීම සඳහා අවශ්‍ය තාමත් එම කටයුතු කරමින් සිටිනවා. යම් හේකින් එය අපිට අවස්ථාවක් වුණොත් ගෙන්න ගන්න ඒ සඳහා ෆයිසර් එන්නත ලබා දිය හැකිද යන්න පහුගිය දිනකදී සාකච්ඡාවක් පැවතුණා. ඉදිරි දිනේදී මේ සඳහා අපගේ එන්නත් පිළිබඳව තියෙන විද්වත් කමිටුව රැස් වෙන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා ලබන සතියේ දිනයකදී. එහිදී අපිට මේ පිළිබඳව ඔවුන්ගේ නිර්දේශය ලබාගත හැකි. ඉන් පසුව අපිට තීරණය කරන්න පුළුවන් එම දෙවන එන්නත් මාත්‍රාව ලබා නොගත් අයට මෙම ෆයිසර් එන්නත ලබා දිය හැකිද නැද්ද යන්න.
Meanwhile, yesterday the first dose of the Sinopharm vaccine was administered to 13,131 people, while 8,880 received their second doses. Further, 44 people received their second doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine yesterday, raising the total of fully inoculated people to 372,719. In the meantime, as health authorities continue to carry out vaccinations across the country, coupled with the COVID prevention measures put in place, Sri Lanka's daily COVID-19 cases have shown a slight decline in the past week. Yesterday, 2,196 COVID-19 infections were confirmed across all 25 districts of the country. Of this figure, the highest number of cases were recorded from the Western Province with 1,078. In the district breakdown, the Gampar district reported the highest infections with 436, while 324 cases were reported from Kalutara. The Colombo district meanwhile had 318 COVID-19 cases confirmed. Meanwhile, in contrast, the lowest number of cases were reported from the North Central Province with just 17 infections. In addition, this includes 18 foreign arrivals currently being treated at treatment centres. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's overall COVID-19 related fatalities rose by 45 to 2,769 yesterday. However, in contrast to many countries and the overall global mortality rate, Sri Lanka's COVID-19 death rate is reported to be far lower. According to figures released by the Health Promotion Bureau, the island's COVID-19 death rate stands at 1.13%. The figure is better than neighbouring India that has a fatality rate of 1.3%, the United States with 1.79% and France with a rate of 1.92%. As per the Health Promotion Bureau, the highest fatality rate has been reported by Brazil with 2.79%. This means that for every 1 million population in Brazil, 2,370 people succumbed to the virus. In the meantime, the country's overall number of COVID-19 recoveries rose by 1,639 to 212,825. In addition, following the confirmation of 1,228 new cases today, the country's active cases currently stand at 31,808.
With the travel restrictions imposed yesterday coming to an end at 4 a.m. tomorrow, the authorities have requested the public to behave with responsibility as the country is not out of danger just yet. Further, once the restrictions are lifted, inter-provincial travel will still be prohibited until further notice. However, only essential service providers will be permitted to cross borders.
The entire country came under travel restrictions once again at 10 p.m. last night, ending the 66-hour window of free movement that commenced on the 21st of June. The restrictions will be lifted at 4 a.m. tomorrow. However, the general public has been requested to behave responsibly given the high risk level the country still remains at.
We are passing a period where nearly 2,000 COVID positive cases are reported in the country. So this is not a very good situation, but considering all aspects, the government have decided to open the country with restrictions. Now, we believe that the people of the nation understand this situation very well. So therefore, we believe people will adhere to the health guidelines given from tomorrow. No one can go between the provinces. It is only the essential services, food and items can go, but no one else is allowed to go other than the people who are involved in essential services. So this will continue until further notice.
Further, the police say that the lifting of restrictions does not mean the private gatherings can be held at residences and warn that special operations will commence tomorrow to nab any violators.
Officers in charge of police stations have been instructed to gather information in respect of illegal parties, public gatherings and other activities. Special police escorts have been deployed to conduct raids in respect of illegal activities. Therefore, stay at home all the time and respect the quarantine rules and regulations and the quarantine restriction order.
Meanwhile, a marked increase in traffic accidents has been reported, with deaths doubling on a day-to-day basis when movement restrictions are lifted.
10 deaths have been reported in respect of road traffic accidents within the period of last 24 hours. The statistics shows that 5 deceased are pedestrians, and in addition to that 4 deceased are motorcycle riders and pillion riders. So therefore we are going to deploy a special traffic police teams in order to control the situation, and it has been observed that drunken drivers and reckless driving are the main causes for road traffic accidents.
Meanwhile, several areas of the Jaffna, Batticaloa and Kurunegala districts were isolated at 6 a.m. today to curb the coronavirus spread in those areas. In the Jaffna district, the areas of Reclamation West and Gurunagar were isolated this morning. Further, the Manjan Thoduwai North Gram Nildare Division, Jinnah Road in the Manjan Thoduwai South Gram Nildare Division and the Mamangam Gram Nildare Division in the Batticaloa district were isolated today as well. What's more, in the Kurunegala district, the Villagoda village in the Ilupugedara Gram Nildare Division as well as the Kanukatiya village in the Kanukatiya Gram Nildare Division also entered isolation at 6 a.m. today.
ගෙදරකට තේ හදනවා කියන්නේ වෙනම වැඩක්. මැලිබන් තේ ගෙදර පදමට තේ.
Following a second lion testing positive for COVID-19 at the Dehiwala Zoo, calls have been made by veterinary experts to revisit PCR testing procedures for animals. The calls come as experts say that animals already have coronaviruses in their systems, and testing for COVID-19 using human virological testing equipment could provide false positives or negative results.
A second lion at the Dehiwala Zoo had tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. The lioness named Sheena had tested positive for the virus 4 days after a lion that shared the same cage had been diagnosed with the virus. However, the phenomenon is not a new occurrence, as lions and tigers at the Bronx Zoo in the United States and 8 lions at a zoo in Chennai, India have also tested positive for the virus. However, the Sri Lanka Veterinary Association raised concerns today with regard to the manner in which the diagnosis for the virus had been conducted.
This has been tested by the medical faculty Ragama, and we can't accept the results because it was not under the scientific proven methodology. COVID-19 virus present in animals can give false negative results in human virological testing kits, because this coronavirus is available in animals' body as a commensals, and these viruses have the common gene sequences, so they can give always inconclusive results and false negative and false positive results also as well when you're detecting COVID-19 viruses using the human testing kits. Therefore, it is always advisable to send the samples to the only available facility available in Sri Lanka for testing this COVID-19 in animals. That is in University of Peradeniya, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and Animal Science.
As such, Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and Animal Science at the Peradeniya University, Dr. Dilan Satarasinghe, explained the procedure utilized to test animals for coronavirus.
Department of Agriculture in United States recommended certain guidelines to detect SARS-CoV-2 infection in animals, and actually they demoted using human test kits which has not been validated for animal use in testing animals for COVID-19. So as the result, we have established a system to detect all these SARS-like viruses. In 2003, the SARS zoonotic disease came to human from animals, and again in 2019 it came from the same clade. So this clade we categorize it as Sarbecovirus subgenus. So Sarbecovirus subgenus is normally present in certain animals, and those viruses can be zoonotic and cause diseases in humans. So first what we do is we use same technology PCR to reduce entire group which has potential of coming from animals to human, and we screen the animals by using that primate probes first. And if it is positive, then we use the confirmatory testing, different type of primate probes targeted for genetics material in the virus. Then if it is positive, then we try to use other test kits that can say definitely what type of strain associated this strain. So a non-validated test for animals used for testing is very critical because it affects the accuracy, sensitivity and the specificity of the test.
Today is Posun Poya Day, one of the most venerated Buddhist festivals that marks the arrival of Arahat Mahinda Thera, who carried with him the sacred teachings of Buddhism to Sri Lanka. However, unlike in previous times, devotees weren't able to celebrate the festival in their usual colourful manner, as public gatherings and Buddhist temples were restricted by travel restrictions. Families were instead required to observe the day and engage in religious observances in the safety of their homes.
The day which marks the arrival of Arahat Mahinda Thera, the son of Indian Emperor Dharma Ashoka, bringing the noble teachings of Buddhism to Sri Lanka during the era of King Devanampiya Tissa, is celebrated by Buddhists in Sri Lanka today as Posun Poya Day. The arrival, which is also referred to as the Mahinda Gamanaya, is a significant milestone in the country's history, as Lord Buddha's teachings, praised by Arahat Mahinda Thera, shaped Sri Lanka's society by adding the social and cultural values we adhere to today. Issuing his Posun Poya Day message today, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa says that the Buddhist clergy has offered proper guidance on how we should venerate Arahat Mahinda Thera while protecting ourselves from the COVID-19 pandemic. The President added that we should all commit ourselves to making our lives meaningful according to the teachings of Lord Buddha while paying attention to those guidelines. In the meantime, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa in his Posun Poya Day message said that Sri Lanka emerged as a great nation through the teachings of Buddhism preached by Arahat Mahinda Thera. The Premier added that shaping our lives as per Buddhist teachings is essential during the period when the entire world is affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Traditionally, Buddhist devotees usually celebrate Posun Poya Day by engaging in religious observances at temples, observing Sil, as well as organizing dansals to offer refreshments to pilgrims. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought all of these traditions to a standstill, as public gatherings have been restricted and the public advised to engage in religious observations at home with close family members. Meanwhile, the Derana Vivandana Posun Poya Day program worked off in Ruwanvali Saya in Anuradhapura and was telecast today on TV Derana and FM Derana for devotees at home.
Anti-narcotic operations continue in the country with a number of arrests made yesterday. Heroin and cannabis were among the seized narcotics, along with well over 5 million rupees in cash.
The Vice Squad of Colombo North Division has arrested 25-year-old female suspect along with 1 kilogram and 21 grams of heroin at Modara area, and police are seeking to obtain a detention order in terms of the provisions of the Dangerous Drugs Ordinance to detain her for a period of 7 days for further investigation.
The Colombo Crimes Division has meanwhile arrested an individual who was found to be in possession of a total of 4 kilograms of cannabis.
Colombo Crimes Division has arrested 24-year-old person at Jnanavimala Mawatha in Dematakoda, along with 4 kilograms of cannabis sativa L ganja, and in addition to that 5.5 million rupees has been recovered from the possession of the suspect. We are conducting continuous operation in respect of narcotic substances and drug traffickers.
Meanwhile, more heroin has been seized during anti-narcotic operations conducted yesterday.
In addition to that, Colombo North Division Vice Squad has arrested another 59-year-old female suspect along with 14 grams of heroin. And in addition to that, the police have recovered 291,000 rupees from the possession of the female suspect. And another raid has been conducted in Matakulia area by Matakulia police, and 31-year-old suspect has been arrested along with 20 grams of heroin.
The Committee on Public Finance has approved regulations pertaining to the import of special purpose vehicles following reports of importers misusing the facility. This comes after reports of refrigerated trucks being imported under the TA concessions only for importers to remove the refrigeration system and retail the vehicles as regular trucks.
The Committee on Public Finance granted approval earlier this week for the issuing of 1 trillion in treasury bills under the Local Treasury Bills Ordinance, which is scheduled to be presented to Parliament for approval by Minister of Finance, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. At the meeting held online due to the prevailing situation, Treasury Secretary S.R. Artigala stated that an increase to 3 trillion rupees from the current limit of 2 trillion to be expected. He added that this does not imply that the full amount will be spent in the next 6 months and that it will be managed within the borrowing limit approved by the Parliament. The committee also approved 2 regulations that will be tabled in Parliament under the Imports and Exports Act No. 1 of 1969 that was presented to the House on the 8th of June. Treasury Secretary also revealed that tax relief provided for the importation of special purpose vehicles has been misused, requiring such regulations to prevent any future occurrences. He explained that last year alone 947 freezer trucks were imported, but the importers had reportedly removed the refrigeration systems and used them as ordinary lorries, and that given such a situation, tax revision have been implemented accordingly. Further, a previous rejected proposal calling for the increase of salaries and allowances of members of the Office of Missing Persons, including the chairman, was approved at the committee meeting after taking all factors into consideration.
More news on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. In international news, an Israeli official of vaccine manufacturer Pfizer says that the company's vaccine is efficient against the globally dominant Delta COVID-19 variant, showing an efficacy of around 90%. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 fatalities in Russia have seen a spike in numbers to its highest since February after reporting 548 deaths overnight.
As the virulent Delta variant has become the globally dominant COVID-19 variant of concern, Pfizer's medical director in Israel says that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is highly effective against the Delta variant of COVID-19. He said that Pfizer has an efficacy around 90% in preventing COVID-19 deaths. In Israel, more than half the 9.3 million population have received both Pfizer shots, and a steep drop in cases have prompted most economic restrictions to be lifted. Meanwhile, an analysis by Public Health England, where the Delta variant is more widespread, found that both the Pfizer-BioNTech and AstraZeneca vaccines provide more than 90% protection against a hospitalization from the Delta variant. Meanwhile, Russia has started to see a spike in the country's daily COVID-19 deaths as it reported 548 fatalities overnight, which is the most confirmed in a single day since February. 88 of them have occurred in Moscow, while 93 were from St. Petersburg. The country's overnight COVID-19 infections stood at 17,594. As a measure to control the virus spread, the Moscow mayor has ordered bars and restaurants in the capital to serve people only if they have been vaccinated or have had an infection indicating immunity, while unvaccinated people are to be refused non-emergency hospital treatment.
Once again, calls for the removal of trade and economic embargoes against Cuba were approved at yesterday's 75th United Nations General Assembly sessions for the 29th consecutive year. A total of 184 nations voted in favor, and only the United States and Israel voted in favor of keeping the almost 6-decade-long sanctions that has reduced the Cuban economy to tatters. However, the United States says that the sanctions remain a tool in Washington's broader effort to advance democracy, promote respect for human rights, and help the Cuban people exercise fundamental freedoms.
The United Nations General Assembly has for the 29th consecutive year called on the United States to end its almost 6-decade-long trade and economic embargo on Cuba. A vote on the issue that was taken up yesterday at the UN General Assembly's 75th sessions ended with 184 votes in favor, 2 against, and 3 abstentions. The resolution has been approved ever since the General Assembly began to vote annually on the issue back in 1992. However, only the United States Congress has the power to lift the economic, commercial and financial embargo that has since 1962 left the country's economy in near ruins. Addressing the Assembly, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parilla called the blockade a massive, flagrant and unacceptable violation of the human rights of the Cuban people. He added that the embargo is about an economic war of extraterritorial scope against a small country already affected in the recent period by the economic crisis derived from the pandemic. In response, the political coordinator for the US mission, Rodney Hunter, said that the sanctions were one set of tools in Washington's broader effort to advance democracy, promote respect for human rights, and help the Cuban people exercise fundamental freedoms. China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, called for an end to the US embargo, saying that all countries should bear in mind a community of a shared future for mankind and oppose Western powers that resort to abusive unilateral sanctions in violation of international rules and international order.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.